Hello, good evening, and welcome everyone. I'm here with Paul. Hello, Paul. Hi. Uh, with me, I'm hoping that actually, I'm audible. That all of us are audible. Hey, it's Paul. There you go. Yeah, welcome to the stream. We'll be talking about villains and how to write them, and maybe also how not to write them. Um, Quick disclaimer: I've been having a cold recently because the little one is going to um, daycare and is bringing home all kind of exciting new viral infections. So, all great. Anyway, welcome. Can you quick introduction? I think introduce yourself.
Introduce myself. Well, you've put me on the spot there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
hi everyone. I'm Paul. I am. How many games am I writing on at the moment? Too many. I run the USS Athena. I help support running the Mary Rose. I play on Power Rangers and X-Men. So my writing tastes are eclectic and varied. I also serve as your fleet comms director. I should probably lead with that as well. Actually,
Yeah.
that's apparently I'm kind of a big deal.
Do you have like many letterbound books?
Many leather-bound books and furniture
Awesome.
that smells of rich mahogany.
Yes. Very nice. Awesome. Yeah, I wanted to kind of invite you on for the villains episode of this because we have been kind of getting into the thick of things with X-Men Avalon, and you are um, uh, joining that in the capacity of, I'm just switching to the cast listing, of our dear general, whose name eludes me at the moment, Heinrich Falkenrath. Uh,
Can't not see, can't not hear Sean Bean's voice in my head
yeah,
whenever I think about that character.
it's the right face claim, I think,
Yeah.
for this particular character. I think this one is from the picture itself is from Snowpiercer, might be. Anyway, yeah. So before we kind of get into the thick of things, because we are working on a post uh, around two villains actually setting up shop near X-Men Avalon. We'll be jumping into that one relatively quickly. But before we do, always good to hear some thoughts on the topic at hand. What do you think makes a good villain?
What makes a good villain? Charisma, believability. I mean, I could go into a long list of these. I think it's probably easier to have a discussion about who the best villains we think we've come across in fiction probably would be. I think that's usually like using examples is a good way to go.
Yeah,
I
go
think
ahead.
the more popularized ones are like Darth Vader, for instance, or Thanos from the Marvel films. That like they seem quite um, polarized at the very least in terms of they're a villain that people like to see.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Characters like Homelander from The Boys is a
Yep,
villain that everyone loves.
loves to
And
hate.
the kind of villains that you almost want to see succeed as well. I think there's an element of a good villain. You kind of guiltily want them to win in the end. Um, but also, I think the other key element is their justification, their character motivations. They're not two-dimensional characters; they're three-dimensional. They've got motives. They've got potentially rules and lines that they cross or don't cross. Um, Ways that they behave. You could go into the whole alignment chart of chaotic evil, neutral, and lawful evil, and things
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that if you really wanted to. But um,
Bring in a
there
bit
are
of
great
D and
examples
D.
of
Yeah,
each.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, I think yeah. What do you think?
There's a couple of shout outs in the chat already. Hello, Cypher. Glad you made it. Welcome. Um, Phil Tippett is being mentioned. The guy in charge of the dinosaur cages in Jurassic Park. Wasn't like was he called Newman in Seinfeld? I think. Anyway, uh, Magneto, obviously, always a
Oh
fan
yeah,
favorite. Yeah. No, I think
absolutely
I
magnificent.
think in general terms, a believable villain, obviously someone that has kind of believable motivations and goals, but it's just like I like the villains the best that just take it a bit too far, and that's why they're the villains, right? Can be if you're looking at Vivo Vendetta, for example, or Watchmen. Those are kind of stories about anti-heroes anyway. Um, but you can very easily kind of see, especially in Vivo Vendetta, that like the big bad obviously is the authoritarian government, but from the viewpoint of the established kind of government and conservative party there, Vivo Vendetta is or V is a terrorist, right? And
Mm.
it's just kind of the motivations and kind of the viewpoints that we are kind of privy to that make them a, well, in this case, an anti-hero, but still a protagonist in the story itself. Um, and I think the best villains are, aside from amazing monologues and all that, which has been brought up, um, uh, kind of that believable motivation, and then also being able to tell kind of where their interpretation of that, I guess, goes wrong, so that they get into that villainous part of it.
There's some really good recent examples of things like that. The Batman animated series that just came out recently on Amazon Prime. I
Mm.
don't know if people have seen it, Caped Crusader, but the way they've done Two Face's arc on that, you really sympathize with him. And the fact that the villain is actually Harvey Dent and Two Face is the kind of almost the heroic kind of good side of him who's in pain.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's very, very well done in terms of balance of actually it's the human side that is the villain of that character. And
Right.
you kind of go, oh, hang on a minute, that's a really clever way of kind of understanding the psychology of him, in that he's done lots of bad stuff already. And it's kind of his villain journey has taken him that direction because of the human side before he became Two Face.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's
Exactly.
the fact that the Two Face, the burned side of him, is actually the one that's in pain and suffering and is the more honest almost to himself,
Right.
which I think is really interesting.
He's more able to kind of see himself for what he is.
Yeah,
The Riddler on Gotham, the series Gotham, I think, is what Cam is bringing up as well. I don't know if you've seen the Gotham series.
must admit it's been a long time since I've seen that.
It's been a while. It's an adorable bad guy. Yeah, like
There's another great example. More recently, I don't know if people have been watching Rings of Power as well. The way that Sauron has been portrayed in season 2 has been really good,
right,
as a kind of gaslighting, manipulative type
right, yeah,
character. Very so. I know that kind of that element of personal manipulation through. Well, you said you wanted this, and kind of using that to manipulate others is done really well. But also, there's an element of he sees himself as I just want to bring peace.
yeah,
I was wounded. I suffered. I don't want other people to suffer. I need to bring order and structure, similar to kind of a Anakin Skywalker almost.
yeah,
Um, Sort of sense of things. But yeah, the way he's been portrayed and done, and almost self-deluding to a point of actually like he's been hurt in the past and he wants to bring order, but maybe it's not the right way. It's because he's been hurt
right.
or damaged in some way.
Yeah, it's also the like the part that's what Cypher also um, kind of brings up with the operative from Firefly is
Mm,
the you know this is a character that is 100% convinced that they're doing the right thing, right? And kind of that in combination with the ends always justifying the means make for a very kind of compelling uh,
I think he
villain.
has a line, doesn't he, in the film where he talks about the new world is not for me.
Yeah,
It's not for the likes of us. I'm just here to make that come about.
you make it happen. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, awesome. So, what do you? We're talking about villains here, and of course, there's a broader topic of antagonists, which I didn't really kind of want to get into because there's all sorts of kind of convoluted literary ideas that kind of hang with that. So we're just going to focus on the bad guys and gals, obviously. Um, what kind of what I think is funny, by the way, is that just a sidetrack that your face claim for your main captain for the Athena
Mm,
is is the bad guy from the Red Alert series.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, from the original Command and Conquer. Yeah.
Command Conquer. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, yeah, and um, obviously it's just it's a good face. But what makes just on the topic of kind of that in Star Trek that we write in Star Trek a lot. We write in now in the Marvel universe kind of. What do you think is the main difference for writing a villain for a Star Trek plot and for a um, X-Men plot?
That's it's a really good question because I think when we talk about our Marvel storylines, it's quite easier to see where the lines of hero. It's very clear that there are heroes and there are the superheroes,
Yep.
um, and they have a particular standpoint. And for our characters particularly, there's the idea of prejudice and being the outsiders, and the kind of the oppressed, you might say. So for Star Trek writing, it's a bit more difficult because you have the Federation being this utopia of goodness, and then it's anything that seeks to break that utopia, I guess, is regarded as a villainous group. Now, it's interesting when, particularly if I'm writing for Athena, I think because we do quite we try to go for these kind of high stakes, action filled,
Hmm.
probably sort of leaning towards the DS9 style um, storylines. If you want to try and pick a Star Trek style that we look at, so
Yeah.
the villains that we portray are more the conspiratorial, the ones that are undermining, rather than being out and out kind of mustache twirling, ha ha ha. It's more the we're conspiring to change something.
Right.
We're doing something for our own ends or to achieve a bigger goal. So it makes it a challenge in in some terms because you need the long form for that to work. You need
Yep.
a long journey, which is why I try and do seasonal arcs with my storylines. It's we know we'll do 6 to 8 missions, all the missions, but the storylines,
Hmm.
episodes for a season, and I'll try and do. There's a an overarching villain or an overarching threat or something we build towards um, being the kind of underlying underscored kind of antagonist villainous element to it. But it's very difficult, I find, to kind of. I almost fall into the Doctor Who trap of killing off the villain too early,
Mm.
um, and not allowing them to return. Um, so I'm trying my best not to kill off all our villains at the moment. I think.
It's more difficult than you think. Yeah. The point has been brought up that you can kind of vary with that with major and minor villains too. That you have like, has there been a story arc like that where there's like 6 missions where you're thinking you're, oh, now we're responding to this threat and was responding to a different threat, and then at the end of it, turns out there's a puppet master behind it all.
Yeah, absolutely. Our first kind of season arc did that with different elements. So we had one villain who was a Breen captain who was kind of seeking vengeance. Our ship destroyed his son's ship. He was kind of father on a vengeful mission, but then that was linked in with a badmiral, as I like to call them,
Badmiral.
a Starfleet
That's
badmiral,
nice. Yeah, yeah.
who was kind of manipulating things to kind of bring back the whole militaristic element of, oh, we fought a war against the Dominion, and that helped the Federation grow stronger, and so he wants to do that again by triggering up a war with Breen. And so the kind of first couple of missions were dealing with this Breen guy, but then there was kind of, he disappeared for a bit. We did some other stuff that there was a thread kind of running through that he then reappears at the very end as part of this kind of villainous armada.
Right. That's pretty cool. That kind of thing. Do you ever feel like the Cypher's bringing up the thing as well, is that people want to win, kind of resolve the issue, and then a villain's death is kind of the high point of that, right? It's kind of climactic, yay, we won type deal. Um, do you ever feel like, because I in the X-Men games we have kind of set pieces, right? We have the Sherwood Rangers, which is kind of our equivalent to the Brotherhood. We have the Human Protection League with attached to it a kind of a Weapon X type program. Um, these things, like we could basically kill the leaders of those groups, but it kind of undermines the premise of we're stuck in the middle, right?
Mm.
But by not letting us be that victorious, basically, you can't beat them, like completely beat them, because then you no longer have a story. um, Ever run the risk of kind of making the writers or the characters feel kind of less strong or weaker compared to them? I think that's kind of a
It's
risk that
part of the
we
hero's journey, isn't it?
yeah. But it does require at some point the victory, of course.
It does. A victory doesn't have to be defeating the villain. It can often be foiling the villain.
Yeah.
And there's often a difference there between, oh, I've got a master plan and I'm foiled and therefore I retreat, kind of as the villain. A sensible villain always runs away.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one of the
Very,
things that bothers
very.
me in video games is
Yeah.
when the villains battle to the death, when
Yeah.
actually I'm losing, I'm going to run.
Exactly. Yeah. Very few people actually would battle to the death, as it were. I think there's an amazing kind of what do you call it, blog for D&D about tactics that you can use as monsters and kind of enemies. It's called "The Monsters Know What They're Doing," and kind of one of the earliest kind of premises that even a wolf, right, knows self-preservation, right? If the HP gets low, they're gonna run for the hills. But it kind of goes against that game logic that you only get the XP when they die, right, on the last hit, or when they die, you get the loot. So um, yeah, it's always something to keep in mind, I think. Um, for our particular writing right now, just to set the scene a bit, we have the general who. Can you tell us a bit more about his kind of motivations, what you have in mind? Kind of,
Oh,
you hear Sean Bean when you write him, but
yeah,
his motivations, kind of, that you keep in mind when writing
it's hard, and I was worried you were going to ask me this question because
him.
it's a difficult one to really refine down. I think we talked about this before about how when you've not written a character for very long,
Yeah.
you're a bit tentative about exactly. Okay, I'm still exploring this character and where they're coming from. And so I've thrown ideas around in my head around. I don't want him to be too similar and cliche to existing villains that we've heard of. I don't want him to be exactly the same as William Stryker,
Right.
for instance.
Yeah.
You know, whose son's a mutant and he angry and things like that. I don't want that. Um, there has to be another element to it, and I think there's him being a soldier is kind of foremost in my mind a lot, and as a general and as a tactician, and I think it's the threat, the feeling threatened. I think is part of the motivation for his dislike of mutant kind, and um, he sees them as weapons and tools, generally speaking. So it's like there's a rush to claim control of weapons that maybe aren't in the right hands in his perspective. So from him, I'm seeing it more as he's a tactician and strategist looking at the bigger picture and thinking there's a next generation of weapons here. There's a real threat to people. He's a soldier. His idea is I fight a war to protect and stop bad things. Therefore, in his mind, the right thing to do is to let's get rid of these weapons that are in the hands of teenagers, for the most part. We need to control that. We need to make sure it is in our control, in his opinion. So I think that's where I'm coming from at the moment with Falkenrath.
Right. Yeah.
Why don't you talk
Makes
about
sense.
Astrid as well? Because I think there's an element of the foil there. Because your character in this is a little bit more different, and probably I can imagine. You correct me if I'm wrong, but is it uncomfortable to write a character like the one that you've got there?
It is a bit. There's definitely a kind of a sadistic twist to it. I think that's what you're kind of sensing or maybe referring to. Just assuming there or yeah. The I just to kind of reflect on what you were saying. Like I really kind of like the idea of this is just a kind of a military response to weapons of mass destruction basically going into the hands of teenagers, and it makes sense, right, for the protection, like the protection of a, your sovereign nation or what have you. You would kind of be expected to do that, and then I think for some part, maybe for him as well, it's kind of as a response to okay, he's getting these orders, and it's what he's always. You don't make it to general without kind of knowing how the hierarchy works, and that's kind of how I see what you're kind of putting that in there as well, right? The
I
first
think
post that we,
there's.
yeah,
I was going to say that just the extra piece of that is because I've listened to interviews with people who are soldiers.
hmm
I don't have military background myself. I'm sure other people do. But when I've seen interviews with soldiers, they say that the further up the chain of command you get, the more detached they become from the front end.
yeah,
And I think that's definitely true of him.
yeah,
I think he's less concerned with the rank and file and the front line, and he's
yeah,
more concerned with this big picture and perception and the political impact.
yeah.
Um, that's in my mind as well a little bit. I think. Sorry, so carry on.
No, that's good. No, that's good. Kind of to highlight as well. Now, like I like the first post where I think also this kind of foil or contrast or what you want to call it kind of came to view, right, with my character and yours, where your character came in kind of to inspect the weapons and tools that they have created in their fight against these kind of rogue elements in society. Um, and from my perspective, it's just the doctor is just, well, for one, coming off as very sadistic because he's also very much seeing them as kind of things to experiment on, and to kind of see what makes them tick. I think it's much closer to from the series Heroes, Skylar, who is just who wants
100%.
to know what makes them work, and then you know manipulate that to work for her in a way, and I think it's much more this fascination with how can I get this to do what I want it to do rather than do what it wants to do for itself. Very much kind of looking at it from that detached, um, almost psychotic um, viewpoint, or psychopathic, I should say, viewpoint, where yeah, like she doesn't um, she doesn't do it because it hurts the mutant. It's not sadistic in that sense, but also she's not seeing them as human, so she doesn't care that it does. Right? It's kind of very much that
Mm.
ends justify the means, and the idea is to get these things to work in their favor. So in our first kind of interaction, the general um, kind of came in, did an inspection of the facility that they were in, and they had a mutant that they had kind of, altered, manipulated in such a way that they would follow orders. And basically, in the first round of it, um, basically got uh, beaten to a pulp, and then switched on the enhanced abilities, and was able to kind of prevent from being beaten to a pulp again, as an inspection. And then the general said, "Okay, are they ready to be put in the field to be deployed?" And the doctor was sure they were, which is what brings us to kind of this situation, right? So the setting is that a couple of days ago, the Mutant Registration Act got implemented, and Avalon, as a whole, is basically a bastion of people that refuse to register. um, and in response, in their infinite wisdom, the British government has um, placed a lockdown on the thing, basically putting Avalon Institute under siege. This is being supervised our by the good general, and now that kind of the first encampment is set up, a big old truck comes moving up the hill, um, from which our good doctor kind of emerges, and finds, uh, yeah, wants to have an audience, I guess, with the general, but is basically is providing some additional material, I guess, for the effort of the army's presence there. I think that's where we're at. Is that kind of an accurate
As
summary?
far as I know.
Yeah, that's where we are. So again, as we are writing, we're setting kind of the scene. There's a low rumble in the distance. This is kind of the diesel truck. In my mind, this is just a huge armored truck, right? That you see kind of moving money about. And I think we see something very similar in the X-Men movie with the black leather outfits, where they are driving the Juggernaut around. I don't know if that's number 2 or 3. I think it's number 3. It's basically a big truck, and then in the back you have a mutant kind of locked up, and ready to go. The doctor comes out, wants to see the general. Um, there's 2 police officers on duty that neither of them really want to let them through, and then there is someone that also has been introduced kind of fairly recently, um, and also very vaguely, I think. um, that
He
kind
was
of,
intended to be a throwaway character that we
yeah,
then thought, this guy could be interesting.
comes back. um, Coming back, Doctor knows the Doctor. The Doctor kind of, they've crossed paths before, have not been really on friendly terms, I guess. So it really kind of, I kind of threw that in there because we know what the Doctor is like. especially towards mutants. So the question then becomes, how bad is this character that the Doctor doesn't like this character? I thought that was pretty. That was a fun, fun thing to put in there. But we'll see how that evolves. We're at the point where kind of kind of half sarcastically, she's asking for, have you had any luck convincing mutants to register? Which obviously, what they're doing right now is not an effort to convince anyone. It's just an effort to kind of squeeze them until they have to comply, basically. So, balls in your court. Um,
Yeah,
this is going to be interesting to to try and write, because last time I also found with Penny that it was difficult to talk, to chat, write, and kind of have all that interaction. But I'm gonna give you a
yeah.
moment.
What you need is you need Chris to start saying controversial stuff in the chat, and then you can
Exactly.
respond to that. And you can chat to Chris and the chat whilst while I'm trying to write something off the top of
Exactly.
my head.
Yeah.
It's an interesting kind of, because especially since this minor character isn't someone I've necessarily gone, right, I've got a really strong idea in my head. It was just here's a guy in a black suit who just lingers around in the back and is doing something that's kind of, ooh, he's a little bit
Super
scary,
shady.
spooky, shady guy.
Very
So
shady guy.
so he was literally just a background NPC that had a few lines in in a solo I wrote. So I'll have to spend a minute to try to think.
Yeah.
So when I'm writing, and this is probably a good opportunity just because it's a let's write session, that um, I don't know how you go about writing, but for my technique is often I'm a very visual kind of writer and almost quite cinematic when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
um, when I write in my tags. I have to see the scene in my head quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to. I generally build up a picture of what's going on in the environment, who's walking, standing where, kind of facial expressions.
Yeah.
So it can take me a moment just to kind of go, okay, what's going. I think it's probably my ADHD brain that goes hyper focusing in on what's going on there. Why are they sitting? Why who's standing in? And I forget about the whole. I need to actually write something. Um, but that's fine.
I'll
Um,
give you a moment to
yeah,
center yourself and to do that,
I'll I'll
as Chris is
I'll
spewing
get into
nonsense in
my
the chat.
put on my stage face and get
Yeah.
into the zone. And I'll let you engage with the chat whilst I go into the document and try and do some
Yeah.
writing.
That's all right. I'm not going to respond to any of that, actually. um, the offense to the Juggernaut being made into a mutant, there's a lot of things, concessions that had to be made for kind of big screen adaptations of like literary formats that have been around for 60 plus years. I can understand that that's not like the true nature of some of these guys, but to be fair, and if you look at the true nature and backgrounds of some of these characters in X-Men, I think it's just easier to just say he's a mutant too. Deal with it. But I get you, right? It's something. Mariah Carey's Christmas song is great. Nope. Mayo has no place on anything. Mayo is pretty good with fries, actually. That's something that happens here in the Netherlands a lot. Called a patatje met, which is good. Mutants now in our world, they would be in prison, definitely, 100%. I think in that sense, actually, um, the Boys is a more accurate depiction of what would happen if there were people with superpowers than any other thing that we've seen before. Which also, kind of the Boys. I have I have the graphic novels here. The series is actually much better at you can't believe I'm saying this, but being a bit more nuanced about how that kind of works out. So the boys, yeah, it's the south. Is that like the South End equivalent?
Back to you, Mr. Emu. That was
Awesome.
quicker than I thought it would be.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
I'm
Yeah,
not
I think
quite when I write, I'm quite quick at just getting it out.
you just need to get to it. Well,
I tend to then spend about 20 minutes kind of going, did I write that right? Could I add to that? Could I change the words there?
yeah, yeah. Add a word, remove a word, put a comma
I
where
think
there should. Yeah.
the idea I've gone for here is that I'm making this character up in my head a little bit as we go along here, which is
Mm-hmm.
not so bad sometimes because you can improvise it a little bit. Shout out to Move for last week in terms of the improv idea of things.
Mm-hmm.
Go check out that video. There you go, plug. Um, improvising him as this kind of not necessarily James Bond type character, but someone who is very, very deliberate and practiced with his actions and kind
Mm-hmm.
of comes across and is probably trained to be not noticed in a room as much as possible. And I think that's kind of maybe a character element I've picked up for him so
For this
far.
character, yeah, pretty cool. All right. Uh-huh. Let me just
Now we
very
get
quickly. Can you see the chat? Because Chris is about
yeah,
to drop some controversial topics for you, I
a bun. Is it a bun? Nice buns. No. Oops. Demonetized. Um,
think.
is it a bap? Is it a bap though? Isn't it, Chris? Do you not have like a sausage roll? Now, Chris. Now we'll get on to the real subjects. I am ordering a sausage roll. There you go. That's how my brain works, by the way.
There you go.
Stream of consciousness. It'd be good to shout out in the chat if you guys want to, especially those who've been writing a little while, if they've written villain characters before and memorable scenes and memorable characters that they've kind of maybe come up with or written with in their writing time with others in this community or beyond. I'm interested to hear kind of those little anecdotes. Um, trying to think of any myself, and it's quite difficult to kind of think of the real kind of memorable ones, which is maybe a bad thing. I need to write more memorable villains. Although my character, so my main character on Rosie, his brother, is kind of an antagonistic character for us at the moment, and yeah, he's actually a Starfleet officer who's a bit of a ass. There we go. Challenge has been that as much as I like writing villains and prefer them to heroes, any villain I write for longevity becomes an anti-hero. What's the line? Live long enough to see yourself become the villain? Well, apparently you're written long enough to become a hero. I guess that's the Loki thing. Like a character becomes popular and likable, they turn into a main character. And you're seeing that, I think we're seeing that a bit more frequently at the moment. And because we've got Loki, we've also got Agatha Harkness, who was kind of presented as an antagonist or a villain in WandaVision, but then has kind of spun off to form her own heroic journey. So that's an interesting one. Do I have villain characters? I can't think if there's many villain characters I know that became heroes. Just heroic characters that are not very nice. Palshar agent villain from Starfleet perspective, Patriot from his perspective. Yeah, absolutely. Villainy is always a matter of perspective. Yeah, why it's interesting to try different kind of perspectives. It's why it's interesting to write in terms of Rosie, I think, particularly where we are trying to walk that line of we're not necessarily the typical heroes. Yeah, and employing some of those other characters, the little darker side of stuff. When writing a villain, do you write a long arc or write in reaction to the players? That's probably both. I think the whole point of writing in a community like this is actually it's collaborative, and you write in reaction most of the time. I know for a fact that one of my players on Athena has got a villain arc already kind of starting to work out. We're going to do that slowly over time, dipping them in. Um, and so I'm kind of helping them to bring them in and saying, right, here's the mission outline. Do you want to bring them in? Where do you want to bring them in? How much involvement do you want them to have? So being a bit planned ahead of time with that one. But then like the actual detail in my note shy could be more reactive. Have you ever thought of a villain theme music? I mean, who has the best villain theme music? Darth Vader, probably.
Who
It's
has
probably
the best
badass.
villain theme music? Darth Vader, surely.
Yeah, it's probably the Imperial March, isn't it?
Yeah. Or,
Can't think of many others, but
and hear me out on this one, Javert.
good shout. Yeah, and that's going to be in my head.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I think I'm done there. You can pick that up.
That's great. Chris has asked a final question in there, so I'll let
Yep.
you uh, pick up on his one about killing off
Killing
characters.
a PC. Yeah. I um I thought about it a lot. Actually, I one of the things in the collaborative writing thing is that you're kind of always mindful of other people's characters, right? So even if they leave, you don't really do anything untoward with those characters, and um, I'm wondering, if in this particular um, instance, I should be a bit less of that. I do like kind of consequences for actions as well. So people that get in the way of a villain that is clearly telegraphed to be um, too strong at the moment to face will be struck down. But there's always a good reason to not kill them outright as well, right? So I don't think in um, any of my games I have killed another player's character with a villain. I'm struggling to actually think of one that has outright died of my own. That is not to say that they are let off easily. um, my characters are riddled with trauma from all the different villains, but also all the other things that happen to them. Not villain, well, not necessarily villain related. The T-Rex from Jurassic Park has the best theme. I think the theme for when they first see the dinosaurs is better than T-Rex theme, but the music in Jurassic Park is just top notch anyway. So yeah, a Talshiar agent, like you also already responded to this. Like the Talshiar to me are very interesting. I think um, a secret police in a society that is basically already a secret police in and of itself is very interesting to me. I wonder how they, aside from kind of technological things, how they get most of their internal information at least. Like we know that in the world that we live in now, that most of the intelligence is from kind of assets, right? Because that not only gives you the information, but also gives you the kind of nuanced interpretations as well. And not it's not as not too much data to kind of sort through. I think it's easier with computers, large language models, and all that sort of stuff to be able to do that nowadays. But back in the day, not so much. And also, the Romans have been shown to have a dislike for AI and all that sort of fun stuff. So easy to go too far as a villain. Yeah, I think it's a good question from Chris. There, is it easy to go too far as a villain? I think with anything collaborative writing, you wanna collaborate with the other players, right? So you would never do something to the character, especially as a villain, that they have not um, kind of signed off on. I wouldn't suddenly drop out of nowhere on someone that the villain is kind of squeezing the life out of him or something along those lines. That makes no sense. Or stabs him or does something else that is kind of unspeakable. Um, I think there have been instances where you go like, "Whoa, whoa, I don't, don't do that," or "I don't like that." But it's, in my experience, much more prominent with playing characters that are just not reading the room and are not kind of in on that in that sense. So just eat away at these Dutch pepper nuts.
I'm going to throw this over to you. Otherwise, I'll be staring at it for another five
Also,
or 10 minutes, just thinking, I could do that slightly differently, or how do I set that up a bit?
we can always go back, kind of. I'll throw it on the
True.
site. You can always go back and kind of change it
It's
after we're
coming out
done.
raw.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're here for at the moment. All right. Yes, as a point, right? Okay, so we got into the tent here. My character asking, "Have we found a suitable entry point yet?" We're exploring a number of options, kind of stopping himself from giving more than that non-answer, as he kind of calls it to himself. Then the general comes in, introduces himself. A number of options for gaining access when we need to. A number of moving parts to this operation. Media presence, obviously. Um, to gather enough intel to suggest we may have a number of advantages that they do not yet know about. How about our assets? That is a very interesting question.
Interesting to read some of this commentary that I've missed whilst writing here, in terms of there a bit of time with the other characters, like, whoa, no, I don't like that. I've seen occasions where I've had to call out a writer for doing something that's maybe a little bit inappropriate for the age rating of the I'm on. Um, that's rare. Uh, most people are quite respectful, and to be fair, I think the community, one of the best.
One sec, your mic just fell off. You kind of no longer have audio.
No longer have audio.
Yeah,
Can you hear
you're
me?
back.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm back. Okay, I don't know how much people caught of that, so I'll just move on. Almost, in yeah, entirely too easy to stop yourself from going far enough. Most people are more socially concerned than the villain they're writing. That's true, I would suspect. I love a big villain. How big are we talking? We're talking 6 foot, 7 foot.
Just his looming presence. Like,
A big villain, usually with overarching plan that's seeping into other things, I assume, rather than just a minion. What do you think is the most common rookie mistakes when starting a villain character? Cliches, probably for me. Trying not to make them, as I call them, the mustache twirling maniac who gets stuck monologuing. Um, I like to. I personally have tried to make sure mine are a little bit. I like to call them antagonists rather than villains. Anyway, I've got a couple that I have in the back of my mind at the moment. Um, I've definitely got one long-term and sort of antagonist character that I'm working through. Who he isn't overtly threatening, and that's one of those things that I like to try and I want to try and keep it subtle with that one. The camp villain tells all his evil plans to Igor his bumbling henchman. Exactly. I'll tell you what I did once. So I'll share this little kind of anecdote that I. So here's me kind of doing my oh look at me moment. So I studied creative writing at university, so I've got a degree in writing, which makes me infinitely more qualified than any of you. I'm joking. Doesn't at all. What I would say is that there was I wrote a script, a pilot script for a sitcom based in the superhero universe, and the main villain of the first episode um, is called the Shadow, and he is literally just a shadow that monologues, and he has a henchman called Minion. Doesn't have a name; he's just Minion, and Minion does everything the Shadow tells him to do until the heroes come along and say, "Hang on a minute, why are you doing this?" And it kind of light bulb goes off in his head, and Minion's like, "Oh yeah, I don't need to work for you because you can't actually do anything to me." And hang on a minute, I'm not getting paid for this, and wanders off, and that's how the heroes win. Um, yeah, that's my Igor the Bumbling Henchman story. A cliche villain does work well sometimes, though. I think it's easy in some ways to write. I don't want to make that as a negative thing. Easy to write isn't always a bad thing if it fits your storyline. And he has a degree in English Lit, so we can all have our fun. Yeah, but is it a degree in creative writing? I don't know. Don't know. Does it compare? I suppose it probably does. Probably better than mine. I didn't need to do much reading. Just did a lot of writing at 2 in the morning after a few drinks. That was my university life. Oh, and lots of system linked Halo. It's funny actually to go back and read some of the stuff I wrote from back then. So I'm quite impressed by some of the stuff I wrote back in those days. I'm thinking I should, if life was different, I would stay up until 2 a.m., 3 a.m. because that was my peak writing time. Oh, Chris, we both know you can't write. Make sure you give us a like, folks, if you are enjoying this wonderful tale of scum and villainy that we're working on here. Feel free
I'm
to
just trying
share
to think of English words. So
your own anecdotes.
sorry.
That's fine. You'll
It's
see
big
me pause
words.
on a word where I'm like, do I pick a different word for this, or
Which one do I need? Yeah.
I need to pick a better word? It doesn't fit me. That made some noises in my ear. That
Yeah, that's not how that works, Andy. It's not that I don't know the English equivalent of a Dutch word because I don't when I write or when I speak now in English. I don't think in Dutch and then translate it. I just, after about 2, 3 minutes of speaking or writing English, it just, the thought process is in English. I had just off on a tangent. I had a study in international communications in the first week or so, we had like this introduction camp where we go away from your home and you just go only interact with these international people, right? So I've been talking in English all week. I come back, I have this thick accent for my Dutch speech and trouble getting to the Dutch kind of things, which I found out because I was on the train home when I ran into kind of a mate of mine uh, on the train home, and I tried to explain to him all the things that we did, and it was hilarious and weird because I was born and raised in the Netherlands, so I have no business losing my Dutch. Not well. There weren't many English people. There were a lot of international people, like Bulgaria and a couple from Africa and Germany and the Nordics and all that sort of stuff. So not actual English people, thank God. No. I'm
My
trying to
sister works
kind of
in. Oh,
sorry. I'm trying to kind of
okay.
think of a um, let me see. I'm trying to think of a kind of a synonym for compliant or very kind of.
Docile.
No, it's more that they're willing to cooperate. Basically, I know there's a word there. I just can't.
Submissive, not quite submissive.
I can't.
Cooperative.
I'm just gonna put in cooperative for now. I'm gonna think of a different word, but there's a good. Um,
My favorite game is thinking of other words to
yeah,
describe something.
there you go. I think it's Europe for
I'm
that
it.
one. Yeah, tag you are it. I think if you haven't learned Russian swear words from a Russian chief engineer, you probably learned it from CS Go or any other online game. Very, very willing to teach you those words, I think, the Russians.
Play enough parts of Iron 4 and you'll be screaming out words in foreign tongues.
Right.
Let's have a look here.
See if I can actually use that. Time. We can try and order a ham sandwich, but we need to know what order you want to give to the ham sandwich, Andy. Although I think if we're going for Russian, we're probably gonna order the ham sandwich too. Never mind. Let's not. Sorry, make it political. Mm. I think that's the appropriate approach for um, communicating with people that don't speak English. Just slower and louder. Por favor. Dos cervezas. I think anyone can do that as well in Spanish. In poor Spanish, I should add, but you know. Oh, can I just say, as you're writing, Paul, um, as you were writing this, I was like, hey, I mentioned in a post with the Duke that they have an asset inside the Institute. So maybe the
Mm,
deployment is to extract.
okay, that's a good shout.
And maybe that, like, I think that might be a cool way to deploy this character for the first time. Sad backstory is that you really have to have a villain's origin story up. I will be kind of honest with you. For most of these characters in my, like, the villain characters in my head, um, I have motivations and I have kind of backgrounds. But if we look at kind of the main mutant villain, I have their appearance and their powers description. I have a bit of their personality written out, but the history is empty. Uh, I kind of know where they're coming from, and there's a bit of hidden background that's already been alluded to as well. But I'm not going full throttle on writing out the entire history. And the case for most of the cast members, especially on a X-Men sim, is that, yes, there is tragic backstories and there's um, difficulties that they will have come across. Um, but that's kind of part of this genre in that sense. Like, I've also made some characters outside of this where like, okay, so this is a bad example, I think, is Avira. On Star Trek games, you have to also keep in mind that these are officers in a military organization that get vetted also on a psychological basis. So even if they have kind of elaborate, sad backstories, they will have to have dealt with it by the time that they join Starfleet, because you're not gonna get through that
Mm.
vetting process if you don't. So in that sense,
I'm sending
maybe
the
that.
tag back to
Yeah,
you, and I'll pick up on
yeah,
that discussion
yeah.
if you like.
Cool. Yeah, cool. I think that
It's
would
one of the
be
things.
an interesting, actually. Sorry, before I go into the tag, would be an interesting kind of point for a villain in the Star Trek setting. Is just someone that is continuously rejected by the Academy for psychological red flags. Sorry, that was me.
Nick Lacano.
Yeah.
I think that's true. Just to pick up on it from the perspective of someone who sees and has seen a number of character applications over the years, it is very easy to kind of fall into that edgelord character trope and have to kind of say, well, speaking from an in-universe perspective, would my commanding officer character say, yeah, absolutely, I want that deranged, psychopathic, unresolved parental issues crew member on my ship? Of course they wouldn't. Um, that's why I always kind of come applications for new characters with that mind of, okay, in terms of how does it read as an application itself is fine, but how does this character fit into the universe, and to follow the logic of, in character, would my captain want that person? Would he hire them? Would he take them on board? Um, even if he was forced to. And so I try and use that try and use that mindset when looking at applications, particularly for new characters joining on. And it's why I like, if I'm going to join somewhere, I want to try and find a hook with other characters. Like I say, oh, that'll link in with that other person as well.
Can kind of tell as well with people that have been more experienced in that, right? Where they're writing their backstory to be able to fit in with the setting, to fit in with the other characters that are there already.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. People who approach you before they've even submitted an application and said, "Hey, maybe I could be a relative of somebody," or maybe they know each other beforehand, things like that. So you get pre-built backstory hooks. There's an element in an RPG that I've been playing at the moment, the Traveller tabletop RPG, where as part of your character backstory, you build the characters together. So when you're rolling up characters, you roll them all as a group in your kind of session zero, and the whole point of that is it gives you reasons to be together as a group. So you're rolling a certain backstory event, a little bit like you would on the Star Trek RPG stuff. You roll a backstory event, but then you kind of you say, right, who around the table experienced that with you, or how does that link your character to this person over here? Maybe they were the contact for that particular job they were doing, or maybe you worked together on something, or got into a fight and then made up, or something like that. So I think there's a really clever system in Traveller that can enable you to do that. The character creation tool in that is amazing. I really, really like it as a TTRPG system. Also used as the inspiration for a number of television shows such as Firefly and The Expanse. Yeah, they always die, don't they? I think I was told that I was fortunate not even to get maimed on my character's creation. There were certain other characters I know in the group, so I joined later, but there were certain other characters that one of them's got a bionic arm because they lost an arm in their character's backstory. And it just happened because of the roles. Might have to try that for creating a character for one of my games one day. See if I can use the Traveller system to come up with some funky backstory.
There's your footage, Chris, of the ASMR typing.
Can't hear it. Oh, on
Sorry.
this side, I wonder if it's. I wonder if they can hear it in the YouTube. I can't hear it through the
They
link
should
we've
be
got.
able. I see my microphone kind of bump, but I think Discord kind of sees it for what it is and it's background noise and filters it out.
Have you ever written an antagonist where you thought, I'm not feeling it halfway through? Probably.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
think sometimes that's doing other people as well. You can hear the clack clack keyboard. Oh, Chris
There
is happy.
you go. This is green switches. I love them being so loud. Mrs. Emu not so much. You know.
I think about the antagonist where I thought I'm not feeling it halfway through. I've always wanted to kind of. I'd love to be able to write those really super intelligent, manipulative, Palpatine type characters. I don't think I'm clever enough. I think it's because I'm not naturally very manipulative for people that makes it harder for me to be the kind of Machiavellian type. and write from that perspective. I'm trying to think of the where it is in the books that I've read that are on my shelf over here. Um, yeah, it's difficult to pick out some of them. I guess that's a good idea, Andy. That if you're not feeling the villain, you just kill them off and replace them with the villain who was pulling the string in the first place, and you just pretend that they were a middle management villain, and
It was
here's the
Agatha
big
all
boss.
along. Yeah.
Exactly. Loving the questions, Chris. Absolute legend for this, helping us keep the discussion up with some of your questions.
Yeah.
What's your favorite antagonist port to write? Long monologue, evil plans, fight scene, with the kettle on, putting the milk before the tea bag. I like scenes where I get to show the intelligence of the villain. Um, but I like the kind of not quite gloating, but I'm one step ahead of you type scene. Some of my favorites that I know something you don't, and I'm lording it over you. Is always fun to write. Um, yeah, I prefer a villain who's 3 steps ahead. So from that perspective, it's good. Um, and the kind of it's always fun to have to write the comeuppance in a sense, but don't usually get to do that much. I don't think of many examples where I've maybe done that.
Where they
And I
fall
hate
and fail.
writing long monologues. Say again?
Where they fall and fail.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think you're up, so I can kind of smoothly run into this. Um,
go for it.
what's your favorite antagonist part to write? Not the long monologue, because I think they are. No one does that. Evil plans, like amongst themselves. I think that's fun, but it depends on how you do it. I'm not a big fan of fight scenes, to be fair, because especially in games like these, the fight scenes just to me they just come off as a pissing contest of but my character is much better than your character and is be able to do the yeah I don't know yeah. And again, like we come back to this again and again. If you put milk in your tea, then you're like 2 years or younger here in the Netherlands. You don't put milk in tea. It's called baby tea for a reason. Tell the other players the 3 steps ahead part. I think in some cases you might, because otherwise it just feels like um, everything they come up with, you're just undoing it, and it feels like you're taking away some of that agency. But I also think that some of the um, concepts that work with villains don't work 100% or particularly well with um, collaborative writing, right? I think quite a few concepts, also going back to Andy's earlier mention about edge lords and that they work in Marvel, is yeah, I mean, sure, in the comics or in the animated series, Wolverine is a great character, and it's fun to read. But in a collaborative game like we have, you don't want a Wolverine. I've said this before. I'll probably say it again. Those concepts don't work. For the same reason, I don't think like player versus player. If you go that route, basically combat works, um, which also means that unless you have a very good talk with the people that you're fighting with in a scene, um, or a very kind of you've built a level of trust from writing with them for 3, 4, 5 years. Um, it just has the potential to get out of hand so fast, um, that it's not fun to do. My favorite part about an antagonist to write is to just have those moments where you're thinking, oh, well, I can understand kind of where they're coming from, and then do a complete kind of whiplash where they just do the most utterly insane, um, kind of thing, which should make complete sense for the character. Better example is Punisher, but Punisher also wouldn't work on a collaborative game. Like any character that is solitary by nature doesn't work because you need like there's collaborative writing is in the it's in the name of the game. So you know, um, if you create a character that is by definition solitary, yeah, I don't know.
Back to you, my friend.
Awesome.
So, just as a kind of fill in the gap here, just to help out. So, yeah, demonstrating that Falkenrath is not a completely evil gentleman at this point, is seeking to minimize exposure and avoid issues by creating a distraction using the nearby village, and the information that our heroes have friends in the village, and perhaps that can be exploited to create distraction for their nefarious plan to go ahead. So this is one of those. Well, the villains have told us, the reader, about something, and actually, like it will set the scene for potentially something that the heroes won't know about, but something they can deal with. So, um, there you go. Sort of thing where people kind of you have to be careful that writers don't go, "Wow, actually, my character's going to see that." Talk PvP or antagonist fight where someone loses. Would you be writing for an audience then? Uh, you'd have to ask him what he meant by that. For me, when we're talking about PvP or antagonist fights, um, I would always want to discuss that outside of the actual writing and kind of go, okay, what's the general gist of where we want to end up? Um, I'm very happy for my characters to not succeed, to lose. No problem to me because that's development and that's realistic. Um, as opposed to writing for yourself or to tell a story. Well, I think we're telling stories. I think that's part of the fun of it is telling the stories that I can then relate to you years later and say, well, actually, this time when I was writing a fight and you know this guy he punched a Borg in the face, and it was really cool and stuff. So I can tell those stories later on, and it's entertainment for us. Um, the audience is who you determine. The audience is whether it's yourself and your friends, whether it's wider than that. It's open to discussion. So there's a few other people in the chat here. It's just Chris and Andy chatting at the moment, but feel free to come in, folks, with other questions and thoughts and anecdotes that you guys have got as well. I mean, as entertaining as Chris is, it's just, it's Chris. Need to highbrow up the content a little bit, yeah. Never apologise for spamming the questions, Chris. That's it's helping us to keep the conversation going. I feel bad when it falls silent because I can only waffle for so long before I start to feel awkward. And I'm running out of stories. ND, I honestly think villains work better in forums where everything is single post and threads are public while I'm motion, whereas there's no real mystery on each post. I don't know how much I agree with that. You might need to unpack what you mean by that. My writing in forums and threads knowledge and experience is limited. I very much buy either play by email or Nova background. Good old Yahoo groups. Long for the days of Yahoo groups.
You're drifting away from the center of your camera. Yeah.
I know. I've gone thinking.
The thinking mode. I think.
Do you
I'm
want
not
mystery in a post you're
just
collaborating in? Yeah.
a question for you for the tag that you left. So this is also, I think, good to show as well, kind of this, as you were speaking about, we need to kind of talk behind the scenes of the thing that we're writing, and also to
Yeah.
tie into the, hey, do you want mystery in a post you're collaborating in? I come firmly on the side of new, but some people do like kind of that aspect of it as well, right? But I'm not quite sure. Like, you're kind of roping in the doctor again, and I know it's also partially because it's a collaborative thing. You don't want to be writing between your two characters in that post. Um,
Fair.
Other than saying, "Hey, we can't use the asset to create the distraction 15 minutes out and then come back and make use of it." Um, I was wondering where, like, if there was something that maybe you had
I
in
figure
mind.
since my assumption is she's a scientist. He's probably so. There's also a little bit of needling going on there from our NPC.
Mhm.
Um, of just being like, oh, perhaps you can do something to help with this, as if to say she's not helping um, subtly.
Right.
Um, but I think there's also an element of he's implying chemical or biological
Right.
activity in a not so explicit way. Or explosion. That's also enough. We can discuss this actually because this is a great example of where, yeah, I think in terms of that, yeah, the element of mystery in a post, but also like it's good when you get to a certain point in a conversation like this where you kind of go, what are we aiming for? What's our objective here? What are we gonna set up?
Yeah, so exactly that's what I meant as well, and especially with when it comes to fights or when you're, especially with antagonists or villains, that you want there's a certain goal to introducing these posts, right? Because the main focus will always be on the protagonist side of things, and the antagonist or the villain side only comes in when it starts to be relevant to the protagonist's story again. So, for example, in the Halloween episode that we did, is it's kind of a chapter before the last chapter. So it's been an entire chapter now that has been in between there. The main antagonists were kind of Robin Hood and his merry men. We've not heard from them for the entire chapter, and they've not appeared yet here in this particular chapter. Simply because not because they're not doing anything, but simply because the thing that they're doing is not relevant to the goings on, right? So it's a very good point that when we're writing these kinds of things, you want it to remain relevant, and kind of the question of what are we trying to achieve, what are you trying to establish in that. So the thing that we're trying to establish here is that, first of all, we need to have an excuse to kind of get into the institute of subject number three. Secondly, we need to find a way to get in. So we have the excuse because we have this intelligence asset that we need to extract. You need a way to get in. We probably have some entries, but there's too much focus for us to make use of them. Um, so that's why we're talking about this distraction. Then the question kind of becomes how much semi-permanent damage can we do kind of to New Cresthill? Because obviously, yeah, there's a baker and a mechanic. But if we just go there and kind of explode the bakery, um, that might be too severe of a consequence
Mm.
for the people that
Mhm.
have put in time and effort to kind of write up those stories and write up those characters, right?
Oh, you don't
Also,
mind killing off your NPCs, though, do
no,
you?
that's true. Yeah, I was about to say that being
Surprise.
said, both of these characters are my NPCs, so I'm not, you know,
That's
beyond.
why I don't feel as guilty referencing them. It's not something. If they were, if the, as a serious point though, if they were someone else's NPCs, I'd be more reticent about name dropping them in a kind of conversation like this one. I think that's just a maybe a writer's etiquette thing. Um, I like to reference stuff that's going on outside, but also like some people might. I've seen people take offense to stuff like that, where they go, "Oh, you've
Yeah,
referenced what you're going to do," type stuff. So just wanted to throw that in
yeah.
there.
But is that because I'm in the post or because it's my characters,
Yes,
even if I weren't in the post?
because you're writing with me and I'm referencing them because I
Yeah,
know they're your characters.
yeah,
I feel more comfortable because then you could easily come back and say, "Oh well, I know what you're going for here, and I'm not worried about it,"
yeah,
or "Let's just check, let's just check." And so it's because we're still in the middle of the post. It's not the same as me then going, "Hang on a minute, I've got to go and check with this other writer that they're okay with us to say that."
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Makes
just a
sense.
simple thing.
Actually, the Gregs is being mentioned. We have two of them. That's more than you technically need in a town like New
I
Crest Hill.
mean, could we halve the number of Grecs in New Crystal?
Yeah. Call the
I,
Gregs.
I'm open to discussion on the what in terms of the distraction because it's it's a discussion that the characters are having, so we can have this discussion ourselves and say, well, what makes the most sense that's not going to cause lasting damage, but would draw some attention without causing too much damage, and needing three other people to kind of, oh, but let's what about this, and I want to do that, and you understand. Trouble is, Chris, if there's a Greggs in every corner, then the small independent bakeries struggle. And there is a
There's at
small
least one.
independent
Yeah.
bakery in Newcastle.
Yeah. I think this is the perfect response for the doctor kind of landing on, you know what? Could also always incite a riot.
This is turning into a D&D plan, isn't
Yes.
it? This,
Very
the
much so.
party is coming up with a plan to do a heist of the Lich's lair. Let's start a riot. When in doubt.
I think also seeing the time and kind of thing, I also
Yeah, of
don't want to
course.
keep you all night, even though I'm enjoying kind of the back and forth and all that. Um, I think this would be a nice place for us to kind of button it up for this
Sure.
set for where this session is confirmed concerned.
Yeah.
We'll kind of get back to this post and kind of finish it up in
Yeah.
private as well. Any parting thoughts in regards to scum and villainy?
Just that it's fun to write the villain sometimes. It's a good challenge to write from a perspective of bad guys. It's good to use it to set up things. I don't know. I referenced D&D just a moment ago, but like that's the things you don't always get to do in certain those settings. That you don't get to see the villain actually plotting
No.
all the time.
Mhm.
So it's good to actually, as well as that, it can then help you expand on what your expectation of what the villain's plan was going to be if you're working on it with someone else like this. So we didn't know any of this stuff was going to come about when we started writing this together, did we really?
No.
So some of the ideas here have developed purely from us just back and forth collaborating, and suddenly we've developed a new thread and an idea that we're kind of grasping hold of. So it's good to
Expanding
do that,
on,
and
yeah,
that then creates more problems for our heroes.
which is always fun. Problems for your heroes, I think, is the main kind of goal for any villain uh, to put in there. Um, Lovely having you on. Lovely writing with you as always. I'm looking
Always.
forward to where we kind of go with the general and with the doctor, and I'm sure by the end of this chapter, everyone will hate their guts, um, which is always a nice bonus, I think. So we will get back to writing, and everyone enjoy that as well. And we will see you in 2 weeks for a new Let's Write, and we'll kind of also let you know what all of that is all about. Um, but again, thank you for being there. Uh, hello, Pmu. Nice of you to be lurking around. Always good to see you there. And we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.